part of the garden is planted with tomatoes? Well, she said that right now there's 10 equal parts, right? How many of the parts in the garden are planted with tomatoes? Caitlin? 5. So right now, 5/10 are planted with tomatoes, right? Well, if we change that to a decimal, how many places past the decimal is the tenths place? Here's the decimal. How many places do we need to go to get to the tenths place? Lily? 1. So I'm going to draw a line. That's the tenths place. How many tenths are planted with tomatoes? Ben? 5. So in the tenths place, I'm going to write 5. The whole garden is 100%, right? Is the whole garden planted with tomatoes? How much of the garden is planted with tomatoes? Noah?
Half.
Percentage-wise. So half would be equal to 5/10, right? Percentage-wise,
50%.
50%. So we have a fraction, we have a decimal, we have a percent written. I love how Kennedy is writing all this stuff down, making sure that she has everything covered. This is not an option. I'm writing it up there for you so that you can look back at it. Okay? Let's look at another garden. Clear the ink and move forward, please. Here's another garden. How many equal parts are there in the garden here? Ernie? So there's 100 equal parts. And how many plots are planted with tomatoes, Roman? 50 out of 100. When we say this as a fraction, what we're saying is 50 hundredths are planted with tomatoes. How many places past the decimal is the hundredths place? Gage? 2. So I'm going to draw 2 lines. And how many hundredths are planted with tomatoes? Amanda?
5.
Does that say 5? 50. So 50 hundredths. So I'm going to fill in. I have 50 hundredths are planted with tomatoes. How can we write that as a percentage? If the whole thing is 100%, how much would be equal to how much is our garden covered with tomatoes? Hunter? 50%. 50%. Are there any other fractions that you can think of that would tell us how much of the garden is planted with tomatoes? 1/2. Cody, hit the back button, please. No, don't clear the ink. It's okay. Is there anything different about this? What's different between this one and move forward? Is the amount that's covered with tomatoes different? Is the amount of total space different? Kennedy?
One is intense and the other is
But the amount of total space. So let's look at both of these, okay? Here is this garden. Go back to the other garden. With the exception of the size, I'm trying to make them both equal. Do we have the same starting amount? Are both the gardens the same size? Yes. Are the amounts that's shaded the same size? Go back to the next one. So they both have half of the garden planted with tomatoes, right? What's the only difference? Noah?
One of them is cut in tenths and one of them is cut in 100.
cut into tenths and one's cut into hundredths. So we have within the tenth, right? We have 10 little equal parts. But still, the same amount of space is covered with tomatoes, right? Which is why we can say that 5/10 or 5 of the 10 rows is the same as 50 of these little 100 squares. Does that make sense? That 5 out of 10 and 50 out of 100 are equal to each other? Yeah, because they're also both equal to half of the garden. Can you agree that half of the garden is covered with tomatoes? And can you also agree that 50% of the garden is covered with tomatoes? So we have a few equivalences, right? Is there, can you move on? Is there anything you can move on? Okay. Because if it goes over 15 minutes, then we can't. Okay, so we said that 1/2 is equal to 50%, which is equal to 0.5, or 5/10, which is equal to 5/10, which is equal to 50 out of 100, which is equal to 0.50 or 50 hundredths. How do we know that 5/10 and 50 hundredths are equal? How do you know that they're the exact same size? Jillian?
Because one's last year, the tenths are like the hundredths, when they're like 50 and 0.5 is the hundredths, and they have 0 added to it, and it becomes like a 0 there.
So here's 0.5 or 5/10, right? Here's 50 hundredths. If you're looking at the tenths place, do they both have a 5 in it? That means that they're both the same number, right? If you look at the hundredths place, I have a 0. I have nothing here. When nothing is there, what can I put here? A 0. Notice that they're both exactly the same number, right? Which means you're covering the same amount of space, which means that they are equal to each other. Okay? What I would like you to do is open to page 2